On today's episode, we are breaking down the game of Jack Murtagh, a powerful goal scorer from the U.S. National Team Development Program who should be going in the first round in this year's draft.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I am your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we are breaking down the game of one of my favorite players from my region this season, Jack Murtagh, a goal scorer who's really diversified his offensive game here over the course of the campaign, making him an even more interesting draftable talent than he seemed to be as the season began. But before we dive into the show today, where we'll be breaking down Jack Murtagh's tools in the first segment, his intelligence and habits in the second, and his overall projection, where he's going on draft day, and where he might play in the NHL in the last one. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. All right, let's just jump straight into the episode here, focusing on Jack Murtagh. So, who is this player? What are his overall stats? Let's dive straight into it. So, Murtagh is a 6'1", 198-pound left shot forward. He's been playing this season mainly between the left and right wings, largely playing on the right side in my viewings this season with Richard Gallant playing on the left. But he can play a little bit at center as well. But with Cole McKinney this year, he's entirely been on the wing. And I think the projection for him is as a winger at the next level. Very high motor player whose speed I think is most dangerous on the wing, where he doesn't have to drop quite as low defensively in his own zone. He's an August 22nd, 07 birthday, so a very young player for this year's draft class. So his runway in his development and the room he has to grow is still bigger, I think, than a lot of other players eligible this season. He's just over 2 weeks off, or about 3 weeks off from being eligible for next year's draft. So very close to that cutoff point. And that has him as a pretty clear first-round talent, according to most outlets here. He's almost exclusively been ranked in like the 25 to 35 range here by most public outlets. With us at Elite Prospects, he's our 28th ranked prospect here in our most recent ranking. Bob McKenzie has him at 26th overall, and the overall consolidated ranking of all the public rankings put together and averaged out, he's number 30. So a guy that's probably going to be in the first round, but could possibly also fall to early on day two, but is not going to be available for much longer than that. He's a guy that's been scoring a lot of points and a lot of goals here this season. 20 goals and 46 points in 47 games in all competitions with the NTDP. That's right up there in terms of scoring on that team. He's been really productive here this season. The only player who has scored, two players scored more than him, but only one has scored more on a per game basis, and that's Cole McKinney, his line mate. The other player that has one more point than Murtagh is William Moore, but he's done that in eight more games, but also while playing less minutes per game. So that could also be taken into account. But overall, Murtagh has been one of the most consistent offensive drivers for the NTDP, and he's off to Boston University next season, which is a great landing spot for his development. What I like specifically about that is that BU is a program that already has a true triggerman in Cole Eiserman. And I think going there with a true triggerman already being in the lineup is going to incentivize Murtagh to keep exploring and diversifying his game and pushing the boundaries of what his skill can do, because he's really added a lot into his game here this season. And we'll dive a little bit more into that progression in the next segment. But first, let's just dive straight into the puck skills here, because there are some really strong ones with this player. He is a sixth grade passer in my book, and this is an aspect that has really blossomed here over the course of the season. A player who at the beginning of the year was pretty much an automatic shooter in the offensive zone, just constantly pulling the trigger and being a very good shooter, which we'll talk about in a second too, but being a bit predictable in his offensive incursions as a result of that. But as the year has progressed, as his chemistry has grown with Richard Gallant and Cole McKinney, the playmaking game, the deceptiveness, these aspects in this game have really grown significantly and blossomed. So a player I think projects quite nicely in terms of adding things into his toolkit in the coming seasons, as he's already done here this campaign. The shot, however, is the best of the puck skills. It's a 6.5 grade in my book, and it is heavy, it's accurate, it's precise, and he's able to score from range. He's the best shooter in the program here this season among draft eligibles, and a player that I really gained a lot of respect for in how he's used his shot here as the season has progressed. It's a lot less become like the go-to facto offensive tool, and a lot more deception and look-offs and overall like body feints used to deceive both defenders and goaltenders as well, of when he's going to shoot and when he's going to pass. And that passing game growing and becoming more precise and quicker over the course of this season has opened up so many more goal scoring opportunities for him as well later on in the campaign. And I think that combination of puck skills is very, very interesting. The handling is probably the weakest of the three. It's a little bit choppy, but there's quite a bit of creativity that supports it, which is something I like a lot in his game. But overall, I think the handling is probably a 5.5 grade. And this is going by our grading scale at Elite Prospects. It is in the description down below if you want to take a look at it. But basically, it goes from 1 to 9, where 9 is like a generational level tool, like Connor McDavid's skating, which is, of course, just the best in the world at the moment. But moving on to the physicality, another very strong aspect for Jack Murtagh. This is a violent player with a high motor who seeks to initiate contact. And to have those habits, to have that physicality and force and power in his game, at this ripe young of an age, again, he's only turning 18 in late August of this year. That's very impressive. And I think that teams are going to look at that profile and salivate a little bit at the opportunities that present themselves to develop this player into a really versatile, like middle six scorer. And I think there's also still quite a few avenues to explore in his development. Teams could channel his game in one direction or another. And when you're drafting a player, having a little bit of agency and say in where you want their development to go, which aspects should be prioritized, that's not available to every player, especially on day 2 of the draft. So if Murtagh is available in that range, to have a combination of upside and potential and skill, as well as a pretty high floor with these high-end habits and just intensity and checking skills, he's going to be a bottom 6 NHLer at least. And the physicality is a big part of what gives him that higher floor. But last but not least, we have the skating. The skating is interesting with this player because he's very fast. This is a guy that in a straight line is one of the faster players in the USHL among draft eligibles this campaign, but the mechanics are a little bit choppy. I wouldn't say that his agility is particularly strong, maybe slightly a hair above average, but not more than that. But the creativity and perhaps the ability to explode laterally, so to make very quick, explosive side-to-side movements, that's something he's been able to leverage to access space at the USHL level this season. So some of these habits support the skating as well and help him access space, like just a very high stride rate, constantly working and trying to push back defenses. But there's still, I think, a lot of work to be done, perhaps in polishing the skating a little bit, as well as improving the skating habits, because implementing a few more delays, being a little bit less single speed in his rushes would really, really transform the way that he's able to create as a playmaker, because he'd have a much more time and space to function within. Whereas right now, his goal scoring habits are still very much at the forefront of just driving the middle of the ice, trying to push defenses back, get into the fray of things, but not necessarily dropping into the pockets of space that those drives create. However, that wraps things up here for the first segment. In the next one, we're going to talk about the brain and the habits. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's very easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's keep things going here in the second segment, talking about the habits, the toolkit, how the overall abilities with this player combine and layer on top of each other, and overall just how smart he is on the ice. Kicking it off, I think that a big foundation of his habits that we broached a bit in the first segment is that motor. He's so intense. He works very hard. He closes his gaps aggressively. He applies a lot of pressure on the back check and also in his own zone. I don't think that this is a player that's going to leave all that much to desire in terms of the defensive effort at the very least. The habits and the actual scanning and awareness, that's a little bit more inconsistent, but that's kind of what you expect, especially for a younger player on the NTDP playing against the top line oppositions and matchups most nights. This is a guy that has had a lot of difficult deployment here this season as well. So I think a guy that's going to be a pretty solid complementary defensive piece at the next level with everything flowing through that motor and the violence streak. The not just the contact initiation on puck, but the hitting and the violence off puck defensively is a real area of strength for this player. Especially earlier on the season, he was going insane and chasing massive hits all over the ice and really finishing them with ferocity to the point that I thought he was one of the more violent forwards in this draft class. As the year has gone on, that's tapered off a little bit. He's not quite in that top tier, like violent forward discussion anymore, but still a guy where the physicality and the intensity are very clear what form his identity on the ice. And also, again, because he's no longer just a shoot first player with a puck on his stick, he's become so much more versatile and a lot more difficult to predict, especially because he has some perhaps slightly chaotic motions in terms of his upper body feints and trying to make defenders miss one way or another, but it's quite difficult to read and predict of what direction he's going into. We'll see how that continues over time. If he's just going to be able to polish it off a little bit and be a bit more fluid in those deceptive maneuvers, or if defenders just aren't going to catch up to read those feints. We're going to see that continues to progress, but overall, he's a player that is just so pacey, so intense, and a level of intelligence and adaptability, I think, too, in both his defensive and offensive implications that make him a player that absorbs a lot of information. He's a pretty quick learner. He's able to adapt and adjust to difficult situations quite well, and also in more challenging games where he's not really finding the areas he wants to get to, where he just isn't creating how he wants to. He's a player that can try to really change how he change his approach in order to have effects in different ways if certain aspects just aren't working on a certain night against a certain opponent. And that adaptability, I think, is also a very valuable part of his game. Pace and intensity make him a really good checking forward as well, especially on the forecheck. This is a player that can apply tons of pressure, really force defenders to make poor decisions. And I think that those are aspects as well that NHL teams really value, especially in the playoffs. If you have a player that's able to score you important goals and has elements of skill like Murtagh has, but is playing in the bottom six of your lineup, what you need almost more than all of those skill elements is that intensity, is that mentality, and that just bite in his game, the grit and on the forecheck being able to force turnovers, to make defenders make uncomfortable decisions in uncomfortably short amounts of time. And I think that Murtagh is a player that protects very nicely to the modern NHL in terms of that pace of play on both sides of the puck. In terms of pace, if we're already on that topic, one thing he's going to have to do, and I prelude this a bit in the first segment, is to layer more changes of pace into his puck rushes. One of the things that makes him a bit predictable on puck still at this point, even though he's added a lot more playmaking into his game, is that he's always trying to push the pace. He's often going near his top speeds, but hitting the brakes, hitting those pockets that his drives create when he pushes defenders back, that's still something that he isn't really taking advantage of all that often. His line mates are, and his playmaking use to kind of exploit that is increasing as the years gone on. But it's still something that has been a bit lacking in my viewings, even later on in the campaign here. So there are definitely elements in his game that need some tinkering, that needs some work. There are habits that are still a bit immature, but he's such a projectable player because he brings you this baseline of violence and intensity with a level of intelligence and adaptability, both with and without the puck, that makes him quite compatible with the diversity of line mates in the offensive zone, as well as just that physicality to be a key checking player. So a lot of things to look forward to with Jack Murtagh in terms of projecting to the National Hockey League level, and that goal scoring ability, the shot, the handling, and especially the passing and what that's opening up for the rest of his game. This makes also that second line potential much more tangible than it seemed around the midpoint of the season, when things were tapering off a little bit for the NTDP, where performances across the board were just pretty poor for a while. But now, at this point in the season, where Murtagh was also one of the more consistent elements, at least in terms of creating and trying things offensively, he's a player that I would personally be taking a swing on towards the end of day one of the draft in the top 32. But I'd love to hear about your thoughts down below. What if you've watched Jack Murtagh? What are your thoughts on how he plays the game? Just how projectable is his intensity and physicality? But we'll talk about that projection as a whole, where he might go on draft day, and which NHL teams will be the best fit in the final segment. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell variety are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's wrap things up here in the final segment, talking about Jack Murtagh of the U.S. National Team Development Program. And where might this player end up on draft day? What's the range for this guy? And I really do think it's going to be in that 25 to 35 range. It's been the consensus all around in the public here all season long. That hasn't really shifted. It's been pretty solid and consistent for the full campaign. And I think he's just the perfect kind of player to take a swing on in that range. There's a certain extent of second line or top six upside, especially as a complementary scorer. But the floor is what makes him just such a clear top 35 talent or top 40 talent this year. He's going to be an NHLer. He's going to be playing bottom 6 minutes as a checking, intense winger who can chip in on the PK and the power play alike. That's kind of the baseline I see for this guy. And the upside just ranges significantly higher than that, right? Going into a second line role. I'm saying complementary. What I'm meaning by that is that he's not going to be the primary play driver on his line if he's playing in that top six capacity. He's going to be playing with a centerman who's going to be the more primary play driver, where things just kind of flow through that center. But Murtagh is the ideal complement because he can bring that F1 forechecking ability. He's a really good shooter of the puck, can finish chances, can be a really good one-time threat on his offside on the left, on the right wing. And on top of that, just brings also all of these defensive habits that I think have so much room to grow as well. He's young. He has room to develop beyond just other players in this year's class. And I think that these are elements that are going to make him really interesting to take a swing on in this range of the draft. And a couple of teams I think might be really good fits First, we have the Nashville Predators, who have a load of picks in that range. I think they have about 3 picks in the conceivable range where Jack Murtagh could go on draft day. And anywhere in there, I think it makes a lot of sense for a player like this. The Predators already have a lot of quantity in prospects, so going for quality and upside is something very important. But I also know, especially as a team coached managed by Barry Trotz, they value intensity and hard work and these hard skills that Murtagh has in spades. So a player I think would fit in really nicely with the overall direction of that team and the identity they're trying to build. The Chicago Blackhawks are another team I think would be a decent fit. The power that Jack Murtagh brings, the intensity, the physicality, the middle drive, these are all things that I think Chicago could use significantly more of in their prospect pool, especially among forwards. So I think he'd be a really nice fit there in Chicago. And last but not least, the Philadelphia Flyers. Again, we have some physicality, we have some goal scoring skill. He's another left shot, I think, which would be interesting on his offside on the right wing there in Philly. And I think he's a kind of player that Danny Briere would really respect as well. He plays the game the right way. He's intense. He has room to grow. He's still quite raw in certain facets, and that presents also an opportunity for a team selecting him. He's off to a fantastic program at Boston University, which only improves that. He's likely going to be playing alongside guys like Cole Hudson next season, with lots of playmaking coming not only from the forward core, but also from the defense. And I think that he's just the kind of swing that you take when you're in that, like, again, 25 to 30 range or 25 to 35 range. Maybe you've already had a pick earlier on in the draft where you're swinging hard on top pair or top line upside. And now you just want to get a guy that's going to be a player and could also be a top 6 piece if things really pan out. But that's the kind of the ceiling I see with Jack Murtagh, right? It's an energetic second line complementary scorer who can push the pace, chip in defensively, and just be overall quite useful, with the floor being much more the bottom 6 energy checker who can play on the penalty kill. So these are both conceivable outcomes in this player's development, but these are the types of swings that you take in this range of the draft where you have a level of certainty as well as upside. And he brings these types of qualities that I don't think many other players have in this kind of balance in this range of this class, which makes him rather appealing. But which NHL players play similar styles to Jack Murtagh? I jotted down 3 names here who play slightly different, but you'll see kind of the overall feeling of players that we're going for with these names. First, we have Andrew Mangiapane, right? Player that's been really, really solid over the years with the Calgary Flames. Very useful here in the playoff run for the Washington Capitals already this season against the Montreal Canadiens. A player that plays with speed and intensity, middle drive, not quite as heavy as Jack Murtagh is, but still a player that's able to play inside contact, has a good shot, good release, can beat goalies from medium range. I think that's kind of the middling potential for Jack Murtagh. If you're thinking more about those like upper echelon comparables for Jack Murtagh, I think that Matthew Knies and Frankie Vatrano are the 2 players that really pop out to me. Matthew Knies has a level of awareness, like situational awareness, that makes him such a fantastic complement to elite skill guys like Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner. I think Murtagh, if he massively hits and sees the kind of D+1 like spike in development that Matthew Knies had, that's a possible kind of outcome in terms of kind of flirting with those 30 goals and 60-point margins while complementing like elite level talents in a top 6 in the NHL. I think that's a pretty possible outcome here for Jack Murtagh, but we're talking a lot more about that upper echelon, the ceiling of his potential. Frank Vatrano has kind of hit that ceiling much later in his career than Matthew Knies has. I mean, maybe Matthew Knies hasn't hit a ceiling yet. Maybe that's going to be way higher, but right now I'm talking about 2024, 25 Matthew Knies as kind of the comparable for the ceiling for Jack Murtagh. But we know already from this player, not what Matthew Knies could become. But Frank Vatrano hitting that upside later on in his career, but wicked shot. I think the one-timer, if Jack Murtagh really just becomes a one-timer specialist, he could even be a first power play finisher if he gets that Frank Vatrano level of release, of the power, the quickness, the precision, being able to elevate pucks from in tight, and just being really versatile with the shooting arsenal, having a variety of releases that are powerful and accurate. So I think that's also a conceivable outcome here for Jack Murtagh. But That wraps up the show here for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are of the episode and of Jack Murtagh specifically as a prospect. Which team do you think would be the best fit for him, and which NHL player is the most direct comparable for his style of play? And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the show. And that wraps things up here. Thank you so much again for tuning in. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I look forward to catching you listening again very, very soon.